You say something completely reasonable in a meeting, and then, at 11 o'clock that same night, you're still sitting there replaying the exact tone of voice you used. Not because anything went wrong, just because someone paused, barely a beat, before responding. And that pause has been living in your head rent-free ever since. If you've ever been in that feeling, this one's for you. And here's what I want to say right at the start. That is not a weakness. That is what neuroscientists call a pain system, doing exactly what it was designed to do. And when you understand why your brain is built this way, a lot of things start to make sense in a different way, a kinder way, and a more honest one. In 2003, a social neuroscientist named Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA ran a very simple experiment. She placed participants inside an fMRI scanner, a machine that tracks brain activity in real time, and had them play a digital ball-tossing game with two other players. That's it. Nothing complicated. And then, partway through, the other two players stopped throwing the ball to them. A video game. A virtual ball. Fake players. But the region that lit up on the brain scan was the anterior cingulate cortex, the same area that processes physical pain. Not metaphorically. Literally. The same region that activates when you break a bone. Your brain is structurally incapable of distinguishing between being left out of a conversation and being physically injured. Think about the last time someone left your email unread, or didn't invite you to something, or the feeling of a whole room laughing except one person. Your brain wasn't being too sensitive. Your brain was processing that the same way it would process a real wound, which raises an obvious question. Why on earth is it wired that way? To understand that, you have to go back. Properly back. For most of human history, belonging to a group wasn't a social preference, it was a survival condition. Food, protection, warmth, mates, all of it depended on remaining accepted by your people. Being cast out didn't mean things got awkward. It meant death. The ancestors who paid close attention to social signals, who noticed when the mood in the group shifted, who adjusted their behavior to stay in good standing, those were the ones who survived. They passed on their genes. And their descendants, across thousands of generations, eventually became you. Mark Leary, a social psychologist at Duke University, built a framework around this called Sociometer theory. The idea, your self-esteem isn't really about you. It functions like a gauge, a constantly updating signal of how accepted you appear to be by the people around you. When someone doesn't laugh at your joke, the gauge ticks. When you say something and the whole room goes quiet, the gauge lurches. Not because you're weak, but because that system was fine-tuned over thousands of years of evolution to do exactly that. The problem is that modern life has changed considerably faster than evolution. The brain, designed to track roughly 150 people, Dunbar's number, is now being asked to process hundreds of social media followers, an open plan office, and a family group chat simultaneously. The system is still doing its job, it's just doing it in a world it was never built for. But here's where it gets interesting, and possibly the most liberating finding in all of this. Not only does your brain process rejection like real pain, it also significantly overestimates how much attention is actually being directed at you. In 2000, Thomas Gilovich at Cornell University ran a wonderfully simple experiment. And the results are so straightforward they're almost funny. He asked participants to wear a Barry Manilow t-shirt, chosen specifically because it was considered embarrassing, and walk into a room full of other students. Afterwards, he asked them, what percentage of people in the room do you think noticed and will remember your shirt? Their estimate? Around 50%. The actual figure? 25%. Roughly double the real number, consistently, across multiple replications. Gilovich called this the spotlight effect. The illusion that we are far more visible to others than we actually are. The spotlight you feel trained on your every move, your every word, that spotlight is, in large part, one you're projecting yourself. A story your brain is telling you. plausible, detailed, and significantly exaggerated. Other people are busy with their story, about the spotlight pointed at them. But knowing that isn't enough. And here's why. Solomon Asch, in the early 1950s, ran a series of experiments that remain quietly unsettling to this day. He sat participants in a room with several other people who were, unknown to them, actors, and asked one very simple question. Which of these 3 lines is the same length as the reference line? The answer was obvious, unmistakable, and yet, when the actors unanimously gave the wrong answer, around 75% of real participants conformed on at least one trial. Nearly 37% went along on the majority of trials. They said the wrong answer, the clearly wrong answer, because the group said it first. Not because they were weak, not because they were unintelligent, but because the pull of social consensus for most people is stronger than the pull of private certainty. Now apply that to everyday life, the opinion you quietly softened because you sensed the room wouldn't receive it well. The preference you edited before you mentioned it. The version of yourself you adjusted slightly to fit more comfortably into a particular space. You may not have even noticed it happening. Most people don't. And the funny thing is, that kind of quiet conformity often feels like social intelligence. Reading a room, adjusting your tone, these are real skills. The question worth sitting with is a different one. When does adaptation become erosion? YouGov ran a large polling survey in 2024, and the data produced one of those quietly remarkable paradoxes. 93% of Americans said they regularly engage in at least one people-pleasing behavior. That is, nearly everyone. But only 48% would describe themselves as a people-pleaser. The majority are doing the behavior without claiming the identity. They call it being helpful, or polite, or flexible. And there's a notable gender gap in the data. Women were more likely than men to identify as people-pleasers, 52% compared to 44%. And women who did identify that way were nearly twice as likely to say it had made their lives harder. 59% said that, compared to 33% of men. A 2025 peer-reviewed review added a clinical dimension to that. Persistent people-pleasing, the review found, is strongly linked to anxiety, diminished self-esteem, emotional exhaustion, and burnout. Not occasionally, persistently. So there is a particular kind of cost buried inside behavior that looks from the outside like generosity. The cost of always being available, of smoothing everything over, of making sure nobody in the room is uncomfortable, except, quietly, you. And this is where the research gets slightly counterintuitive. The answer is not to stop caring what people think. Brené Brown, who has spent over 2 decades studying shame and vulnerability at the University of Houston, put it plainly. Not caring what people think is its own kind of hustle. The goal isn't indifference, it's selectivity. And there's something in the neuroscience that quietly supports that. A study published in Psychological Science, drawing on work by Mara Mather and Laura Carstensen, used fMRI to track how older adults' brains responded to social and emotional signals. What they found? The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, became less reactive to negative social signals with age. The brain, it seems, literally becomes less sensitive to social judgment over time. Not less caring, less governed by it. That distinction matters. There's a difference between being aware of what others think, that's social intelligence, and being controlled by it, between reading the room and surrendering to it. So if you've spent years assuming that caring this much about what people think is a personal flaw, something to fix or grow out of or feel quietly embarrassed about, I want to gently offer a different frame. You are working with a nervous system that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to treat social acceptance as a matter of survival. A brain that genuinely cannot distinguish neurologically between exclusion and injury. A self-monitoring system that, as Ginovich's research confirms, overestimates the audience's attention by roughly double, not out of vanity, but out of caution.
That isn't weakness.
That is an ancient system running in a world that changed faster than biology could follow. The goal was never to stop caring. The goal, if there is one, is to notice who you've let into the room, and to ask, occasionally, whether they've earned that seat. Not everyone has, and quietly, that question, who actually gets to weigh in on this, matters more than most people give it credit for.